this is where all of that effort you put into preparing the welts is going to pay off. All the effort in matching the pattern. We are going to be installing the welt pockets and the pocket bags. So I'll give you a little look here. And you get a sense of just how nicely that pattern matches if you really are careful when you're doing your setup and when you're preparing the welts. That is what we will be doing in this particular section. So we got a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. Here we have the welt and pockets that we prepared in the last segment, and I have also marked out between the tailor tacks a line in chalk and a cross mark here. On the back, I have cut fusible interfacing. This is 3 inches wide, it is 9 inches long, and it's centered. The marks are centered there. This is going to reinforce the pocket area so we can sew in the welts. Now, just put this back here. So here, this is the setup. This is where we're going. So I will take this aside for a moment and set this one up here. I tend to be a little dyslexic, so I really like to lay everything out so that I don't get everything put in backwards. So this welt, that is where it's going to show its face in the finished garment. So what I want to do is to line up this stitching line with this chalk line here and right sides together. So let me pin this in place and I'll give you a close-up detail of this. Okay, so looking closely, that is the end of the welt. There is the tailor tack. So I put a pin here and then working down. There is the other end of the welt. And let me just there. Move that over just a tiny bit. So we want that row of stitches to line up with the chalk mark on the coat. So to give you a little bit of reference, when this is sewn right side out, this will then turn back this way. My next step will be thread basting. And see, the beauty here of this is that we have a row of stitching. I made it in black there. We have a row of stitching that we can baste through so that we can place this pocket exactly right. When you're basting this, use a stab stitch as opposed to just a regular running stitch. The stab stitch keeps everything in place. You don't end up running the risk of shifting the positioning of the welt. It may take a little longer, but this is not a race here. Now if you're sewing, you could sew just a little bit to the seam allowance side. But I like to make the stitches as close to the stitching on the pocket, you know, that join the welt to the pocket as I possibly can. Okay, almost done. So I like to make another stitch or so backwards. So that everything is secure. So now we have the pocket basted in place. Let me change camera angles and we'll see the results. So now, before we commit to machine sewing, I like to just fold that back and see if everything's going to line up, and as you can see here, it pretty much does. So let me do a long view of this to show you the pocket placement. Now I have both pockets basted in. And this is something I do just for myself, but I find if I show you, it will help eliminate confusion. If you turn this one back and this one back, the welts should face the center. So this one here, and this one here. Because, again, if you turn them back on themselves, they're going to land right here in the finished piece. So it's kind of a mirror image thing, putting them in. So now we are ready to go over to the machine and sew the pockets. Before we go to the machine, I feel like a little explanation is in order. So the dotted lines represent the welt underneath the pocket bag. So the welt is sandwiched between your face fabric and the pocket bag. This line here is the visible line of stitching that you basted the welt to the front of the coat with. So what we're going to do, we need to stitch these in two separate stages. So we're going to start, I'm going to turn it here, and we're going to start roughly in the middle. We're going to stitch down along this line to about 3/4 of an inch from the end. Then we're going to shorten the stitches very, very short. And you want to stop this at the end or slightly before the end. Don't go too long on this. So then here, what you'll do is you're going to turn this 90 degrees and you're going to walk it 3 stitches to here. Then you're going to turn it again, and your zipper foot is going to follow that cut edge and this cut edge and stop midway. So we started here, went out to the end, turned, and came this way. So that is the first half. Then we're going to cross back over and we're going to stitch this way, and then about 3/4 of an inch from the end, we're going to shorten the stitches and stitch just to the end, and then walk it 3 stitches, and then we're going to sew following the cut edge of the seam allowance, and then overlap here. So I just wanted to diagram this out because people ask me, why don't you just start and go all the way around, or why don't you start here and go all the way around? What's going to happen if you start here and you try to jump up from like 2 thicknesses to 4, you're going to get a bubble. If you start in the middle and go around, you'll get a bubble here, and you're going to get a bubble at the middle. So starting in the middle and working one side from the center out and on the other from the center out gives you a better result. So diagramming it in paper is, I think, a good prelude to actually showing what happens on the machine. This stitches in 2 passes. The first pass, we're going to go from the middle out to the edge and then around back. So let's see, here we are. Here's roughly the middle, and if you notice, I'm using my generic adjustable zipper foot, and I have it so that the needle is, there we are. The needle is slightly inside the edge of the foot. So now, to orient you, the welt is here. This is the stitching we use to sew it to the pocket bag. Seam allowance here. So we're going to start, since the welt is to the right of the needle, the foot will be to the right of the needle to begin. Now we're going to sew about 1 millimeter to the right of the stitching that's there now. So the stitch length is, let's see, about 2.5. You could go 2.0 to 2.5, relatively short stitch here. So we're going to sew down to about 1/2 inch from the end. So there, see, there is the end of our welt right there. So we're going to shorten the stitches now to 0.5 to 0.75. We want really short stitches on the ends here because there are going to be almost no seam allowances. So we need to be able to have that be secure. So then we're going to sew, and see, this is where you really, okay, there is, okay. When you're sewing, it's better to stop too short rather than too long. We are right at the edge of this welt, dead on at the edge of the welt. The next step is to raise the foot, turn 90 degrees, and sew 3 stitches. That's going to give us room to get our scissors in there to clip. And from here, this is why I have some pins in here. The foot will follow the cut edge of the seam allowance. And this is why we have a very steep angle here. And then turn. So the foot is riding against the cut edge of the seam allowance. So then we're going to end up pretty much where we started. And then we are going to make a mirror image. We're going to bring the foot, have the thread on the other side. And we want to adjust the foot so that it is, again, just inside the edge. And now we're going to come over here and overlap these stitches. There we are. So then stitch length back to the 2.0, 2.5. So we're going to sew down to about 1/2 inch, 3/4 from the end. Shorten the stitches to 0.5 to 0.75. And again, we want to know where the end of this welt is. And the end of the welt is right where that my stiletto is. So we're going to walk. There we go. One more. Now the key here, I keep saying this, it's better to stop too short than too long. If you stop too short, you can always go back and re-stitch it. If you stop too long and you cut, you're going to have a gap. So then again, turn it 90 degrees. And again, you're going to have the foot follow the cut edge of the seam allowance. Okay, so let me take this out of the machine, and then we can reprise. Again, show you how I sewed here. Okay, so here we are. We have this opening. So we started here. We sewed down to the end, turned it 90 degrees, 3 stitches, and then turned it and allowed the foot to follow the cut edge of the seam allowance all the way to here. Then we shifted over opposite side of the foot, and we sewed down short stitches to there, 3 stitches at 90 degrees, down to there, and we joined the 2 stitches here. Now, people will ask me, why don't you just start and take it all the way around? Because what you're going to run into is when you're jumping up onto the welt, you're going to run into a bubble, or you're going to run into a bubble somewhere. So taking it from the centers out and having it, the stitches meet here, is a much better result. Next, back to the work table to clip this opening. To begin with the opening, first I'm going to talk a moment about my tailor point scissors because I do love them. The tailor point scissor has a knife edge blade and it has a bevel edge blade. So the knife edge blade enables you to get your blade into the fabric, and then you turn over and have the bevel edge open everything up. So what that's going to look like here, knife edge blade down. So we have a clip. So then what we want to do, we're just clipping the pocket bag on one side and we're clipping the body on the other. We're not clipping through the welt seam allowances. We're just going through first the pocket bag, and if you get a little bit of this, it's not going to kill you. Then we flip it over, and on this side, after we trim our threads, again, knife edge down, and then just clip the body fabric, not the welt. So we need to just open this up for the next clip. Okay, so now we're open, and I'm going to keep it this side up because you can see the stitching. Now this is where most people go wrong. At this point you're going to cut through everything, and I keep my hand underneath so I don't cut something I don't want cut. And so you sneak up on it, and this is another reason I like these scissors, because you can clip right up to the stitching. Don't be shy. Where people make a mistake is they leave about 1 millimeter there, and then you get a buckle. And I turn around, and again, hands underneath so you don't end up cutting something you don't want to cut. And sneak up on it. Don't feel like you have to take it all in one lunge. And then clip this here. So then I give a little bit of a tug, and now, hello, reach through, grab the pocket bag, and pull everything through to the back. And one thing I like to do is just give a little bit of a tug on these ends. Now I'm going to flip this over and show you. Is that a thing of beauty or what? Now, this is where I can more fully explain why we steeply angle those seam allowances. We've created a faced opening here and here. So the beauty of this is that this immediately ducks behind the welt and hides. And same here. So our next step is pressing. I've got some basting I gotta take out, but pressing. I will meet you at the pressing table. So here we are at the pressing table. So this is sort of what it looks like. Let me just orient you here. That is the entrance to the pocket. And so what we want to do, all of the seam allowances are going to press that way. So, and this is where the sleeve board is going to be your friend. First, I like to press the seam allowance of the welt from here. Fold the pocket bag over it. So now this enables you to see the shape of this. See how you have the sharp angle here and the sharp angle here that we made when we cut the seam allowances on the welt. Seam allowance on the welt is down here, but this is going to service well in a moment. So to reiterate, you press the seam allowance of the welt towards the center. Then this part of the pocket folds again towards the center. So you've pressed the lower part of this opening here. Next, I'm going to turn it this way. Here we are. So we have these seam allowances here. These also will press down. And the easy way to do it really is to press everything that way. And same here. So now, let me just back up a little bit here. Now we have both sides of the pocket facing the front. And all of the seam allowances press facing the front. So now I will turn this over. And here you have the welt. So I'll give you a little bit of steam. Just to make sure everything matches up. And then put a pin here just to hold that welt in place. And then put a pin on this side. Okay, so let me bring this up close. As you can see, matches up pretty well. if I say so myself. Next stop, back to the work table. So yeah, let's just look at this for a moment and revel in how nicely that matches. Okay, enough reveling. Now we want to sew these two ends, and we're going to sew that by hand with what's called a cross stitch. If you sew embroidery, you know the cross stitch. So I'm going to start with the lower end. And this is done by braille. I just do this by feel. So the needle, you want to penetrate everything but the top layer of the welt, and the needle is perpendicular to the edge of the welt. And these stitches are about 1/4 of an inch apart. And when we get up to the top end of this welt, stitch a couple of times to reinforce it so that it will take the strain of actually putting your hand in the pocket. And then we go back into the previous stitching. And then you secure your thread. And this one here, same thing. You start at the lower end when you're sewing, try to catch the canvas that reinforces this. If you don't, it's not going to kill you. So then when you get up to the top end here, again, stitch 2 or 3 times. And then go back into your previous stitches. The beauty of this is that you will not see the stitching from the front, which is the object here. Now, if you wanted to do a machine top stitch on the ends with a little triangle or something, you could do that. This is an evening coat, so I think this is going to be dressier. So let me show you the result. So we turn it over here. We take out the pins. And voila. Matches up pretty darn well, if I say so myself. So next, we need to construct the pocket bag. Constructing the pocket bag is really a simple matter of pinning the two sides of the bag together and then going over to the machine and sewing it at 1/2 inch. So I will take this over to the machine and sew it and bring back the results. And as you can see here, I've sewn the seam and pinked the seam allowances to clean everything up. Then finally, what I'm going to be doing is putting an organza stay and what this will do is bring this over here. It's going to create, this goes to, it's sewn onto the pocket, it's sewn into the seam allowance, so it keeps the pocket itself from falling in. Now this is where I'm going to talk about pocket width for a little bit. This comes fairly close to the center front, so if you want to, you can make this pocket a little narrower so you can dodge around this. But since this is going to be an evening coat, she's not really going to be using these pockets much, so I'm going to leave it at this width here. So we have our pocket, we have our stay, and I will turn this, I'll finish this one over here, and I will turn them over so we can just revel at what we've just done. So here's a long view of our fronts. You can see we have our pocket bags, we have our pocket stays in organza. So there are the reverse. Next, I'll turn this over so we can see the face. Now the coat fronts are finished. We can set these aside and we can continue on with other parts of the coat. One habit to get into when you're constructing is when you have a garment section finished, drape it over a hanger and hang it up. What I have found is the fewer times that you manipulate or handle a piece before it goes into the final garment, the less distortion and error you will introduce. So, as you can see, we have finished the fronts. We're going to hang them up and set them aside for later.